when we go through a trauma, we give it meaning and we store that meaning about ourselves. And a huge, huge part of healing, I would argue even bigger than that we just talked about, is to learn to change the story of ourselves. And I'm happy to share a tool for reprogramming. But, when we go through something, and I'm curious if this was your experience, like in that experience that you shared, right? You see this happening to this person. And I'm sure like one of the big core wounds that we have or pieces of meaning would be, I am helpless, right? Like helpless to fix or change the situation because you're 3 years old. And I actually had a traumatic memory at 3 years old as well, where I saw two people close to me get into a very intense altercation. And that was a big thing for me. Like, I am helpless. And that was a huge core wound. And I carried that throughout my life. And I would constantly go into situations, first of all, trying to oversolve everybody's problems because I was terrified to see people in pain and not be able to do something about it, which of course also served me in certain ways to learn
Yeah.
about people and the human mind. But I actually had to change this narrative that I was carrying about myself as being a helpless person, and learn that, wait, hold on a second, like I'm actually really empowered in lots of different ways. And when we can reprogram the meaning we give to these painful events, because we tend to store that meaning as a core wound, and then that core wound becomes a part of our identity. Healing and reprogramming that is huge, and for different people it's different things. So fearful avoidance often have like, I will be betrayed, I will be abandoned, I'm helpless. These are big fearful avoidant core wounds. I am unsafe, even if just emotionally. Anxious attachments, they're like, I will be abandoned, I'm not good enough, I'm excluded, I'll be disliked and rejected. Dismissive avoidance are like, I'm defective or shameful if I open up, I am weak, I'm trapped in the wrong relationship, I'm emotionally unsafe in a conflict. So we all have these core ideas. And the other layer to really working through from a post-traumatic growth perspective is actually being able to change these narratives that we are carrying deep down about ourselves. And those same narratives, if somebody listening is like, what does that mean? Those same narratives will be the things that trigger you most on a daily basis. So you'll see that if you have this story, I will be betrayed, you're hypersensitive to reading between the lines and seeing anything that could change. Or if you have this wound around being abandoned, that's the thing that triggers you most if somebody doesn't text you back or they pull away. Or if you have this shame wound as a dismissive avoidant, if somebody's critical to you, that's where you will really shut down. So these core ideas that we have about ourselves, that other layer of post-traumatic growth work is changing what's no longer serving, while seeing in that second layer that whole picture and looking for what came out on the other side of the story.
Yeah, it's super powerful, and it's great to have conversations where you can explore things. And I think sharing stories like that allow people to see themselves in their own story, their own challenge. Something that everybody has their own experiences that have negatively and positively impacted them. But when you look at your parents and you look at all of the things that kind of make you where we started here was how, as parents, we're impacting our children in so many ways. And so as you were talking, there are things that you could start to see in your own children as they mature. And how the earliest version, like I love to say that your firstborn is your trial kid, right? Like you are the rawest version of yourself and you don't know anything with the firstborn. And by the time you get to the second kid, you're hopefully a little better. And if you have more, then maybe you're even better. But I definitely I think that it's nice to be able to I like to go back to review, like in any business or anything. Like look back at the gain. Dr. Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan wrote The Gap and the Gain. And if you always spend life in the gap, you're always looking for what you haven't attained yet. But if you look at the gain, you're kind of saying, hey, I was here and now I'm here. And I'm so proud of that. And I'm so excited that's valuable to me. And I remember where I was and how I felt in that moment. And but doing that is such a healthy exercise as long as we don't stay there too long.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's like you've got to go back and visit, remember the lesson, and then move on to the next chapter. And that's where experiences become valuable versus that depression or that anxious state if you spend too much time in the future worrying about everything that could happen.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. So do you mind if I just share one tool for
yeah, I'd love
reprogramming?
it. Yeah, please.
So this is one of my favorite tools. I think that this is for anybody who hears themselves in these core wounds. I can share, like, whenever I go through small T trauma consistently or big T trauma, whether it's from childhood, attachment trauma, you name it, we have these two major wounds that will come up. These two major sort of like dynamics. There will be the lack of the seeing the whole story, and then there will be these core wounds. I'm going to list off some major core wounds so people can just hear them first. And I'm going to tell us how we can actually reprogram these things. So I've kind of mentioned them. I'll be abandoned, alone, disliked, excluded, rejected, unloved, trapped, helpless, powerless, disrespected. I am stupid is a big core wound for people. I'm not good enough, unworthy, bad. And so if people hear these things, I am unsafe is the last one. If people hear these things and they're like, oh, that's my trigger. That's the thing that triggers me. That's the thing that comes up in my relationships and my daily life. It's because in the past, you either had repeated small T trauma or one or a series of big T trauma. And these things imprint our subconscious mind. And then they show up as triggers and the things that disrupt you on a daily basis. We do not have to live storing all these triggers all of the time. We can actually recondition these ideas. And this is a huge part of not just healing and transforming your attachment style, but actually like changing your relationship to the past. And so, let's say, for example, somebody has a core wound, I am not good enough. Okay, just to make it really simple. Whenever we have this core wound, this will show up in all kinds of places. It'll be the glass ceiling in the workplace. It'll be the glass ceiling in relationships. It'll be the thing that we like overcompensate for, or we get really upset about when it feels like it's pushed on as a one of those buttons or triggers. So we can change these things. And the first thing we want to recognize is that these are not conscious decisions. Nobody's waking up saying, I'm going to tell myself today I'm not good enough 100 times and see how I feel. Like, these are not choices. These are subconscious pre-existing imprints because of trauma. So when we want to rewire these painful ideas, we have to speak to the subconscious mind. Now, the conscious mind speaks language, okay? The subconscious mind speaks emotion and imagery. If I say to you, Scott, whatever you do not think of a chocolate chip cookie. Like, you probably flash an image of a chocolate chip cookie in your brain.
Yeah. Plus I love chocolate chip cookies. So yes, 100%.
And so what happens is your conscious mind hears do not, but your subconscious doesn't care. Now, two really important facts when we have these old imprints from past events. Number one, your conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. This is why on a daily basis, people will be like, I'm going to quit eating chocolate, or I'm going to go to the gym every day. And then they go back into the same patterns all the time, because our conscious mind can intend, but our subconscious actually shows up and decides whether we're going to do things or not. The second thing is that your conscious mind controls 3 to 5% of all of your beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and decisions. Your subconscious, 95 to 97%. So we want to learn, hey, if our subconscious has these really painful core wounds, we need to wipe them out. So we've established that the conscious mind speaks language, the subconscious speaks emotion and imagery. Now, how it gets conditioned is it gets wired through repetition and emotion. So what happens is, when we're from a neuroplastic perspective, when we look at neuroplasticity, neural pathways are built through repetition and emotion that's repeated. And it's what hardwires these neural networks in. So if we have this old idea, this I'm not good enough, and we're done with feeling this, or I'll be abandoned or betrayed, or whatever somebody's painful story is, what we want to do is, step one, find its opposite. Very simple. I'm not good enough. I am good enough. I'm unloved. I am loved. I'll be abandoned. I'll stay connected. So step one, find its opposite. Step two, we need to speak to the subconscious mind. We need to rewire at the subconscious level. And so what we need is emotion and imagery, because that's what the subconscious speaks. Now, interestingly enough, memory is just a container for emotions and images. If I were to say, tell me your favorite childhood memory, you might be like, I was playing on the playground, and you see the images of the slide and you would smile as you're telling the memory. So because it's containing your emotions still. So all we need is repetition, emotion, and imagery to reprogram these old ideas that we're done with. So if we can come up with 10 old memories for how we did feel good enough, or things that we did do that were good enough, that's step two. And step three is we record this into our phone, our audio of our phone, and listen back for 21 days, because research shows it takes about 21 days to hardwire these new neural networks. And so if we are done with these old stories from old trauma and the meaning we gave to it, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm always going to be abandoned, and we're like, we want to actually recondition these things, find the opposite of the core wound, 10 pieces of memory to support the opposite, record it, listen back for 21 days, and we can actually change these long-standing beliefs that we have about ourselves that are usually showing up as the glass ceiling in all of our relationships, in the workplace, in our communication patterns, like everywhere we go, we can wipe our hands of them once and for all. And this is a big thing I personally did in healing fearful avoidant attachment style. It's one of the most crucial pillars to changing our attachment style. And it's something that like really, really works if people are willing to dive in and take action.
That's great. It's the power of self-talk alone is so interesting because I think so many people just forget how we find ourselves talking to ourselves on a regular basis. And what you just described are three steps that people can do. And part of it is creating that repetitious language that we remind ourselves that we are enough, that we are safe, that we are, a wonderful human or whatever it is that we need to understand because we're reframing that for ourselves. But so many of us, so many people in some way are not talking to themselves the way that they would talk to anybody else.
Mhm.
I was on a golf course at a PGA, super nice golf course, and I don't belong on any of these golf courses because I'm not good enough. And they put the club pro with me, and he was a phenomenal golfer, like just on the edge of competing at the professional level, but training at the pro place. And after about 4 holes, I listened to this guy talk to himself. And I said, dude, I suck at golf, but I don't sound anywhere near as bad to myself as you do every single time that you get in this cart. And if you sound this bad on the outside, I can only imagine what you're doing on the inside to yourself. And he goes, or he was shocked. And I said, what are you saying to yourself every time you make a bad shot? And he said, I'm really hard on myself. And I said, why don't you change the dialogue and start telling yourself that you practice this all the time, that you know what to do for the next shot and adjust and adapt. And we had by the time we got to the 18th hole, we had a blast and had gotten to know each other super well. And I learned some of the challenges he was coping with and all those types of things. But it was so interesting to hear someone on the outside say things to themselves and only imagine what they're saying on the inside. And so many high performers are trying to outwork these things. They're
Yeah.
trying to outwork these challenges. They're trying to outwork and where they'll get affirmations that are outside of themselves, and then they still feel empty when they receive them.
Mhm.
And it's really a great reminder just to take a temperature check of how we're talking to ourselves, because it you just described not only how you can help heal, but also how it can be a trait that you could start to develop as something that you're building on, that you become the version of yourself you were meant to be.
100%. And here's something crazy. Your subconscious mind works very hard to maintain its comfort zone. So what will happen is like these ideas, like if somebody has this not good enough wound, right? It's a longstanding belief, then it creates all these patterns of thought. So before the thoughts are actually these core ideas we have. And so, if you believe you're not good enough, you'll tell yourself the story, I'm not smart enough, interesting enough, funny enough, good enough at golf, whatever it might be. And so we'll have this sort of like, the branches coming off of the tree trunk of that belief. Funnily enough, even though your conscious mind can observe it and be like, that's not working for me, that's not the healthiest thing I could be doing, your subconscious mind will work really hard to maintain its comfort zone. So what happens all the time to people is these core wounds become self-fulfilling prophecies because their subconscious is just survival wired. So it'll go, well, we've been surviving. So this story, and me beating myself up or being hard on myself, this is working. And we'll actually try to keep going through the same patterns despite them being highly dysfunctional and actually being the things that really are those glass ceilings, like in the golf game or at work or whatever it might be. And so if people look at these core ideas, what often happens is until we actually work through them, they're almost always self-fulfilling prophecies. Like the abandoned core wound, somebody feels afraid of abandonment, so they hold on so tight that they accidentally violate somebody else's boundaries and don't make them feel seen and connected to as their own unique person. And what happens? That person usually pulls away or leaves. Or we fear being betrayed. And so we accuse somebody of something all the time. And eventually they're like, well, geez, whatever. You don't trust me anyways. And that can sabotage relationships. And then we feel betrayed. Or people feel like I'm not good enough. So they don't go for that job interview. They don't, or they penalize themselves so much in advance before getting there that it shuts down their performance. And so these ideas often like come full circle until we're willing to really change either through belief reprogramming or through, like you were saying, like actually just being more self-observant and introspective with our internal dialogue and working through cognitive reframes.
Yeah, and that works with everything, with dieting, with, you know, everything that we want, it can work. I mean, it's so powerful. And by the way, we're all working on it. So nobody is sitting here telling you on this show. I can assure you there's lots of things I'm still working on every day, and there's lots of self-talk I can get better at. And so, I humbly come to everybody listening to this show as somebody that's just sharing a part of our journey so that you hopefully have something that's interesting, or one piece helps you live a better life. And it's all about life at the end of the day: love, impact, faith, and energy. For me, giving up and surrendering to God and something bigger than myself has been the ultimate value add. So thinking I could control everything was the biggest mistake of my entire life. And once I realized that it was a greater there's a greater power than me, even though I've always known it, I didn't fully engage to the level that I needed. If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here, and if you want to watch the full video, click here.